Welcome to our webinar on Alone Without a Home, a state-by-state review of the laws affecting unaccompanied youth. This is a presentation of the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty and the National Network for Youth. My name is Eric Tars. I'm the Director of Human Rights and Children's Rights Programs here at the National Law Center. And we're lucky enough to have with us two members of the National Network for Youth. One, Celia Cruz, a formerly homeless youth who's been served by one of the National Network's members, and Debbie Shore, the board chair of the National Network and executive director of Sasha Bruce Youth Work in Washington, D.C. Just so everybody knows, the full audio and video of this webinar will be available on our website by next Friday if you have any colleagues who miss it or aren't able to attend the full webinar. The National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty is the legal arm of the national movement to end and prevent homelessness. And to achieve our mission, we work in three areas of impact litigation, policy advocacy, and public education, like this presentation and the report we're talking about today. Debbie, if you want to introduce the National Network.
Hi, I'm happy to do so. The mission of the National Network is to connect and champion the needs of runaway and homeless youth and disconnected youth. And we do this through advocacy efforts, national advocacy efforts, local program innovation, building community and services. We are a membership organization, and we have members who are both service providers and other people who simply care about the issue. Should I continue?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so the National Network is very pleased not only by being a part of this report, but the timing of the report, because we know and believe that with the Hearth Act requiring that youth be considered and counted as part of the continuums of care, there is much more interest and discussion and discourse about what the continuum should be for ending youth homelessness, which is different than adult homelessness. Young people are at a different phase of life, and we need to have age and stage appropriate services. So we've done a lot of work, the National Network, to think through what we have so far and what we'd like to build on. And we believe that we have a very strong set of pillars that the service system is built on. And these include basic shelter, emergency shelter, street outreach programming, and independent living programs. And you know, there is an array of young people who need differing kinds of services, and we believe that this basic set of programs really is a good pillar to build a larger system on. So there are various housing alternatives for young people who really cannot go back to their families, and you know, even with our best efforts. But we believe that if we, you know, that what we have is an understanding of these young people such that we believe that we can think through and urge a system that keeps young people safe, that aids the homeless experience for young people to be brief as possible by helping them to reconnect with family, and then to assure long-term stability. But certainly, what happens in local areas, which have, you know, grown up in many ways very similarly, but in other ways differently, it depends upon the support for or the barriers that exist within the legal system. So we're very pleased to have the contribution that this is for our partner, the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty, to take a look at these laws and what could be done to change the laws to help to change the alternatives that we can provide that are effective for young people.
Thanks, Debbie. So on today's webinar, we'll talk about some of the background. Who are these unaccompanied youth and what challenges do they face? We'll then highlight some of the findings of our report, including some of the best practices from certain states, And though we can't fit all 250 pages of the report into this hour, we'll provide some of the highlights and brief recommendations. We'll conclude the webinar with a question and answer session. Although the participants in this webinar can't speak during the webinar, you'll see on your sidebar a comment box, a question box that you can type questions into. And at the end of the presentation, those will be read by one of our presenters, and we'll be able to respond to them. And you can type your questions at any point during the webinar. So I will turn it back over to Debbie to talk about some of the factors that contribute to youth homelessness.
Yes, and I just want to say that the National Network has been working very closely with the U.S. Interagency Council on the Homeless and the leadership at HHS and HUD to really urge coordinated efforts to engage and successfully support these young people. And so that's very important, I think, in terms of what it is that we understand and believe is needed, more coordination and certainly more services. What we know is that there is a very large number of unaccompanied youth. The most recent number was 1.6 million. Some of those young people are young people who are able to go back home very quickly, and certainly the front-end services that we're providing in street outreach and emergency shelter, are helping that along enormously. And then there are some young people for whom the problems at home are more serious, things are going on with family, and some of those young people, unfortunately, at this point become chronically homeless, which we're desperately trying to avoid. What we know from the research, 43% of young people report being beaten at home. Caretakers, 25% request sexual activity, and this increases when young people go onto the street because they're often in a position where they're very vulnerable to continued exploitation. So these statistics really are very stark and certainly show that young people are leaving home out of some desperate need to find some health in their lives, and that we know, and it's important to say, I think, that we are seeing a large overrepresentation of young people who are having conflict with their parents because of their sexual orientation. So we're serving LGBTQ young people in large number. We see a large number of young people that are aging out of foster care and juvenile justice. And I think that it's really important to note that the depressed economy has really driven the number of homeless youth out, and we are seeing a huge increase in the number of homeless young families where the parent is under 24 years old. So these are also little children that are so vulnerable. So there are many different reasons why young people are driven out of their homes, and I think that what we have learned is the importance of the prevention services, the importance of the intervention, and that we really have to stabilize young people off of the street in order for them to continue to grow and develop. So we really need to look at the reality that for so many of these young people, they really are going to need to we are going to need to gear up substantially the number of alternatives that we provide. So the National Network has said that we were particularly interested in making sure that there is an increase in service to pregnant and parenting youth and young adults. The importance of that can't be underscored more. Services to LGBT young people. We are seeing a lot of young people who are commercially sexually exploited. There's some really important issues of protection of those young people and involvement with the justice system, and we're really in a position to help to inform how to better provide protection and services to those young people. We're seeing a huge number of refugees and certainly youth exiting out of public system care. We really are hoping that the conversations that are going on around the country about not just providing service to youth who are homeless, but the plan to end youth homelessness will help us to see the creation of a much larger response to these young people. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. So now the National Law Center is a human rights organization, and we believe in the importance of allowing those directly affected by human rights violations to speak about their own issues and be part of the solution to them. So as I said, we're very happy to have Celia with us today, who's going to share with us some of her story of how she became homeless and some of the challenges that she faced.
Hi, good morning. At the age of 15, I went out with some friends, and I ended up getting raped, and I had my daughter, well, at 14, and then I had my daughter when I was 15, and my mom kicked me out a little bit after that, and my dad was in and out of prison. So I was basically either staying at friend's house or jumping from my aunts to my grandma's, and never really stable throughout my whole life. I always had I couldn't really go to school because I was always getting moved around. So I entered a TAP program in Sunnyside High School, and they allowed me to register myself, which was really awesome because I don't know if they're breaking any type of legal issues, but they helped me get it without parents' consent. And so I gained my education there. I have ran into some issues of being curfewed and getting sent to juvie because of the laws and regulations. My mom refused to pick me up, so I ended up staying in juvenile for a couple months, and then I ended up going to our opening, and then from there I exited out, but I feel like I should have been able to be more ready for being an adult. I guess at 18 I wasn't really aware of my rights or my resources or what I could do. I ended up giving up my daughter for adoption, and I feel like if I had more knowledge or what I could do with my life or how I could, at one point my aunt wanted to adopt me and my mom wouldn't allow it. So I feel like it hindered my life, and it would have been a whole different future, a brighter future if I would have went that route. So I would hope that you guys do gain some light on this issue and it helps other people with the same problems.
Thanks so much, Celia. So as you've heard, unaccompanied youth, like Celia, face a variety of challenges in simply navigating the world that you and I take for granted. They might have difficulty obtaining basic necessities due to their inability to sign contracts or consent to services without a parent or guardian. They have an increased risk of interaction with the criminal justice system, which often makes them fearful of seeking any services, and that is when services are even available, as they are woefully under-resourced in our communities. And because of the lack of resources, youth may not be aware of any services that exist, and service providers may not be aware of or may be misinformed of the services that are available and the laws that apply to their clients. And that's why we put together this report. It discusses the current law in 12 key issue areas across all 50 states and the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and 4 other U.S. territories for a total of 56 jurisdictions in all. It makes some key recommendations to protect the safety, development, health, and dignity of youth, and we hope that the report will be used not just as a reference to understand what the law is, but also as an advocacy tool to make the law what it should be. So who is a youth? Most jurisdictions, 48 of them, set 18 years old as the age of majority, but only 12 jurisdictions include a separate definition of youth, establishing some measure of protection for older youth and differentiating younger youth needs from those of even younger children. The fact that so few jurisdictions have established separate statutory definitions of youth indicates that the statutes haven't actually kept pace with the contemporary understanding of human development and the distinctions between childhood and adolescent phases or of older youth's needs. 8 jurisdictions still retain judgmental terms for homeless youth, such as unruly, incorrigible, or vagrant, and this indicates a punitive rather than service-based approach for those states. 49 states and 2 territories allow family or juvenile courts to involve themselves with homeless youth or families in need of supervision, and however the terminology used and procedures within each state vary widely, with some lumping all of the youth together regardless of their circumstances and others taking a more nuanced service-based approach. For example, Ohio is a good model in that it simply acknowledges that any child who's separated from the child's guardian and appears to be needing emergency housing or other services is a runaway. But it doesn't comment on the cause of the child's separation from the guardian or whether the separation need be voluntary or coerced on the part of the young person. New Jersey's definition of homeless youth merits consideration because it both includes persons 21 years of age or younger within its scope, and because it acknowledges that even these older young people are in need of appropriate care and supervision. And Florida, Maine, Missouri, New Hampshire, and North Carolina all use the federal definition from the McKinney-Vento Act of homeless child or homeless student, which is important because it explicitly encompasses children and youth who are sharing the housing of others or doubled up with family or friends due to economic necessity. This is an expansive definition and one that includes many who are not covered by HUD's definition of homelessness, something that we are trying to change and have. There's a bill currently pending in Congress, H.R. 32, that would make HUD's definition include these children who are identified through the school system's definition. So let's say you're 15 years old, facing abuse at home, and decide to run away. What challenges are you going to face? First, the second you step out the door, you could be committing a criminal act. Status offenses are behaviors or actions that are legally punishable only when performed by minors. While purportedly designed to protect young people from harm and victimization, they also restrict the rights of young people and can result in entangling otherwise law-abiding youth with the juvenile justice system. We examined runaway youth, truancy, and curfew statutes in our report, and 50 jurisdictions explicitly allow police to take runaway youth into custody without their consent and without a warrant. Some jurisdictions even allow runaway youth to be held together with juvenile offenders, and in some cases, those youth who are taken into custody can be facing civil or criminal court involvement. However, in many cases, youth can and should be diverted to social services, which is obviously a preferable option. Second, if it's after dark and you've been put out on the streets, you could be liable for a curfew violation. 39 states authorize curfews explicitly, but many more cities and localities have them on the books. Again, it's far more preferable to provide these youth with services, provide them with a place to sleep in safety, rather than punish them for behavior they may not be able to avoid because they're simply trying to survive. Third, what about education? If you spent the night huddled somewhere trying to stay awake to protect yourself but fall asleep before dawn and sleep through school, truancy is a status offense or considered delinquent in 9 jurisdictions. While some youth may need the threat of consequences in order to stay in school, these laws should be taken off the books, and schools should provide the maximum of flexibility to homeless students to allow them to make up days, credits, and keep them in school, which is often the safest place they could be for 8 hours a day. All of these status offense laws, again, unnecessarily involve youth who are often simply fighting for their own survival with the criminal justice system and often put further barriers between them and a safe and secure lifestyle. But let's say you're able to avoid looking suspicious. and stay in school, or you're old enough that you can leave school and work full-time. Maybe you want to rent your own apartment, or you need to buy a car for work. As minors, unaccompanied homeless youth may be unable to legally obtain housing, buy essential goods, and engage in other transactions necessary to live independently or make their own decisions about medical care, education, or other personal matters. Emancipation allows a young person to become a legal adult while he or she is still under the age of majority. In 33 states, you can apply for emancipation under statutory regimes, but in 10 of those, parental consent is required. So if you have an abusive parent who may just want you back to abuse you, the chances are there that it won't happen. And if you're 14 or 15, you could only apply for emancipation in 7 jurisdictions. A few jurisdictions, like Indiana, recognize that youth mature at different rates. Indiana does not establish a minimum age for emancipation and does not require parental consent. Youth must be able to state that they wish to be independent and show they can support themselves, that they have acceptable living arrangements, and that they understand the consequences of emancipation. This statute both protects the young person's right to become legally independent, but also requires the court to ensure that the youth understands what that means and that they have a safe place to live. Emancipated youth in Indiana will then have the right to enter into contracts, marry, own property, and consent to medical care. The rights of youth to enter into contracts are extremely limited. Only 17 jurisdictions permit minors to enter into binding contracts for even the basic necessities of life. 34 jurisdictions provide minors the right to contract, but only in order to obtain insurance, and 8 give no right to contract at all. Such restrictions are designed to protect minors from making imprudent choices, but they place huge barriers in the way of many fully capable unaccompanied youth who are simply trying to survive. Missouri is one of the 17 states where the law specifies a wide variety of important contracts that minors can enter into, even outside of the emancipation process. This includes housing, employment, automobile purchases, student loans, admission to schools, medical care, bank accounts, and admission to domestic violence and homeless shelters. These categories recognize the goods and services unaccompanied youth may need and give youth a means to obtain them. But by limiting the circumstances under which minors can enter into binding contracts, it continues to protect other young people from potential burdensome contract liability, and those who are truly on their own and able to engage financially with society as adults can do so. There is room for improvement in the statute, as it does require youth to have the consent of their parents, which again may be difficult or impossible to obtain, but at least it's a first step. What if you are on the streets and you have a health issue, maybe a pre-existing condition, or maybe, as so many youth are, you've been subject to sexual abuse on the streets and are in need of testing or treatment for a sexually transmitted infection. Unaccompanied youth face hurdles in accessing health care due to both financial and consent and confidentiality concerns. Only 34 jurisdictions enable unaccompanied youth under 18 to apply for health insurance coverage without the need for parental consent in at least some situations. 29 jurisdictions have explicit policies permitting unaccompanied youth to apply for health insurance coverage. 5 have informal policies, and 1 jurisdiction won't allow youth to apply for CHIP, but does permit them to apply for Medicaid. 35 states with the separate CHIP program also use an integrated system where a youth's eligibility is considered for both CHIP and Medicaid at the same time, but at least 15 require, either formally or informally, a parent or a guardian to apply, meaning in those states, youth may forego treatment due to their inability to pay for it. In addition to looking at youth's access to health insurance, we also look to the wide variety of consent requirements across jurisdictions. Jurisdictions vary widely in terms of specific procedures for which youth can consent, including treatment for mental illness, substance abuse, treatment for sexually transmitted infections, abortion, examination, and treatment relating to sexual assault. In Idaho, any person of ordinary intelligence and awareness sufficient for him to or her to, quote, generally comprehend the need for and nature of and significant risks ordinarily inherent in any contemplated hospital, medical, dental, or surgical care, treatment, or procedure is competent to consent thereto on his or her own behalf. In addition to this broad statement, Idaho also specifically allows minors 14 years or older to consent to treatment for sexually transmitted diseases and minors to request treatment for substance abuse. Idaho, however, does prohibit unemancipated minors from obtaining an abortion without written parental consent, but they do provide the option for a court order if that's necessary. So maybe you're a youth, you are surviving on your own, but you'd like some federal government assistance, and you want to apply for federal TANF benefits. First, you have to be a pregnant or parenting youth to even qualify. So if you don't have a minor child in your care, you are out of luck. A few jurisdictions, 17, still require you to live with your parent, but or a few still require you to live with your parent, but 47 states, provide exemptions from that requirement. 17 of those, however, still do require the youth to live in some other adult-supervised home setting rather than on their own. But youth will have to go to work or to school. Only 14 jurisdictions exempt parents of kids under 3 months old from the work or education requirement. And only 9 jurisdictions provide child care assistance when work or employment is required. So in many cases, you will have to find child care on your own in order to maintain the job or education qualifications that are necessary to obtain the TANF benefits. California's statute approaches minor parents in a holistic way that allows them access to TANF benefits by exempting them from cumbersome living arrangements and also comprehensively supporting the youth in the completion of a high school degree or equivalent by providing child care and even financial incentives to complete their degree, and serves as a good model for other states. Many youth who are on the streets and want to maintain as close to normal a lifestyle as possible, and that includes staying in school. The Federal McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act establishes the right of homeless children and youth to access education. They can enroll themselves in school, as Celia did, receive transportation from wherever they are staying, even if they're couch surfing and have to move multiple times throughout their homelessness. They can get free school meals, so they have at least one good meal a day, and they can receive a surrogate if they need one to help them get special education services. And as I mentioned before, they use an expansive definition of homelessness in the education definition, including youth, not just who are staying on the streets or in shelters, but those who are doubled up couch surfing with friends or family, or staying in hotels or motels. If you're a youth who happens to be released from the juvenile justice system, you're at extremely high risk of being released either directly into homelessness or to placement from which you could easily be displaced. Only 21 jurisdictions direct an agency to develop procedures related to discharge or aftercare from a juvenile facility, and only 8 of those specifically address housing needs within those statutes. While more jurisdictions might use this as a matter of practice, we think it's an important area to specifically statutorily require. If you're a youth on the street and want to access shelter or youth-oriented services, you may well be out of luck. Many jurisdictions have no services whatsoever. In only 25 jurisdictions do states even regulate runaway and homeless youth shelters and programs via a broader child caring license. And at least 10 jurisdictions explicitly authorize the expenditure of funds or authorize local units of government to expend funds for programs and services targeted to runaway and homeless youth, though another 13 authorize the expenditure of funds for homeless youth, homeless services without specifying if there's a focus on youth. However, authorizing funding and providing licensing procedures don't necessarily mean that funding or the services actually exist. I'll ask Celia to say a few words about what the shelter and services she's received and meant to her, and Debbie then has a few words to say about what we know about the shelter and service system. Celia?
What I've well, on our, when I was in our, what is it, Open In, they helped me. I gainfully gained employment. Luckily, they didn't change at that timing in Tucson. The age to work was 15, so I was able to gain employment, and they would help me. I wasn't able to gain a bank account though, so they would make me give them my money, like half of my money, or just help me budget. And the thing about that was my mom, she sold me a trailer which I was making her payments on, and then she undersold to me, so it kind of like beat the purpose of saving so much, because then I ended up being homeless again, and I didn't have, because I was 18 at that time, I wasn't unaware of any resources I could get after that. So I was once again homeless. So if you guys could have, like you said earlier, street outreach, or most people, and then I also see that people without children, if they don't have a child, you can't get access, you can't get food stamps, you can't get any help, and I think that's really sad. And then I was introduced to our family services, and then I came with my son. They helped me through a lot of struggles I went through. I recently lost a lot of people in my family. My dad's been incarcerated for 17 years. My cousin, which is my best friend, and my grandmother, which was my mother, she died, and I had nowhere to go. And I found out of our family services, and they helped me get back to college because I wasn't going to school anymore. They helped me with childcare, basic essentials I needed, and then I ended up getting a DUI, and they did not after I had to do a 6-month period in jail. They helped me continuously. I'm still in a program for single mothers, and I'm just so really blessed that we have resources like this for people that really didn't have parents or weren't unguided. And I just feel like maybe there should be more attention to the people that do not have children, because it's most people that don't have children that wouldn't be able to get the help that I've received. And that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Celia. Debbie, you want to talk about the shelter and service system in the U.S.?
Absolutely. I think that Celia said it brilliantly, that the young people who have benefit of the kind of services that many communities have, though not in large enough numbers, are the lucky young people, because they at least have some basic help to get jobs, get their lives sorted, to figure out about longer-term living, to provide services often to families if they're available, to reconnect and be stronger. But we have limited resources for that. We're grateful for what we have, and think that the pillars that our basic services are built on are very strong. The basic shelter is really an important piece of any system of service for young people. Street outreach, really helps to get out and get information to young people who are particularly vulnerable if they're out there. Just within a very short period of time, young people often are victimized. And then, of course, independent living. And I think that what Celia was also saying is that there, these limitations that exist, not enough services, are huge. And but happily, I think it's a good thing that we know what does work. And of course, we need to do more research. We need to, make sure that our impacts are right. One of the things that I would I would also say, with our interest, the National Network's interest in urging a systematic way of looking at services, that we really need to see and more coordination between all of these systems, between the mental health system, between the education system, between the police. We have a lot of young people who are parents are desperately looking for them and will call the police, and in many places the police are restricted from connecting them then with the National 108 Switchboard, which is a wonderful resource and relates to all of the programs around the country, or locally, kind of being a part of that system. But all of the pieces, really need to be in place so that we really do a better job of ensuring young people are not out there vulnerable, without the kind of supports that Celia so wonderfully expressed. So I think we know that we're clear that the need is to strengthen what we have, to build certainly more services that make it possible that there's no wrong door. A young person should be able to go into any program and get the services that they need. And of course that means to expand services.
Great. So what if you are not a shelter provider, or you are a shelter provider, but you're somebody who wants to help a youth who you encounter on the streets? In a majority of the states, you're either explicitly or implicitly at risk for civil or criminal liability. While enacted to protect the rights of families to raise their children and to protect children from abuse, these statutes may also pose a risk to those individuals and organizations that have a legitimate purpose in providing safe havens for young people currently away from their guardian. Some states have good Samaritan exemptions, such as Wyoming or Alaska, where caregivers who reasonably believe that they are preserving a child from harm are protected. Wyoming provides affirmative defenses to these otherwise criminal acts, which clearly empower the young person to express his or her wishes regarding a custodial relationship, and thus empower the caregiver to act in accordance with the youth's request for shelter. So in broad strokes, our recommendations are focused on ensuring the rights and the dignity of youth, of providing support and services and not punishment. This includes creating expansive and non-judgmental definitions of youth, repealing status offense laws, and making assistance available to as broad a category of youth as possible, up through age 24, where possible, as Celia noted. Those aging out of the traditional care systems are in desperate need of help. In terms of the service system itself, Debbie has some additional suggestions.
Right. So, our suggestions, the National Network has really worked on this to encourage collaborations with all of the public systems and then the private system of services. And of course, in those places where there are not private services, it's really important to develop them. The prevention end of things, I think, is really important. It's really out of the services to runaway and homeless youth that the concept of youth development kind of was developed. Our positive youth development approach is something that has very much been born out of the work that came when so many of us started services back in the early 70s. And that has also, we have also developed capacity in the area of family prevention and intervention services, and that's such an important part of this system, to make sure that if possible, young people go back to their families, and if not, that we're providing them with appropriate, age-appropriate, and developmentally appropriate services. And the other thing that I wanted to say, which I think is so relevant here, is that there is a system of service in some places that are still providing, often punitive services to PINS youth when there is a runaway and homeless youth system. And those systems absolutely should be coordinated, and they really should be one. Similarly, young people that are commercially sexually exploited are often handled as in the justice system, when really these are deep social and family problems that young people have faced that have driven them there, and we really want to see a scaling up of capacity to intervene and help these young people take a step back towards health. You know, I think that our work is before us. The specialized services to, you know, in culturally competent services, you know, need to be enhanced and developed. But as I say, I think the runaway and homeless youth community has a strong basis to build on.
Thanks, Debbie. Finally, just in terms of protecting youth and giving them the autonomy to act in their own interests, we recommend removing the barriers to emancipation and contracting while retaining some protections as necessary, providing good Samaritan exemptions to enable caregivers in both the medical and service settings with the ability to help youth, and authorizing the distribution of financial, health care, and other benefits to youth without the need for parental consent. There are many, many, many more detailed recommendations in our report, and I encourage you to look at them for models of what can and should be done in your state. So that's it for the initial overview, which, as I said earlier, only scratches the surface of what's covered in our report. I encourage you to download the full report from our website, nlchp.org, and while you're there, please consider making a donation. This report required literally hundreds of hours to produce, and we need your help. Also, whenever you use this report, either to help an individual youth or to advocate for improving the laws for all youth, please shoot me an email at my email address on the screen and let me know. We want to hear what we've done right with the report, what we could do better, and how it's making a difference, and whether we can be of any help in your state to make our country a safer, more respectful place for homeless youth. So with that, I will, if none of my other presenters have any comments they want to make, we can open things up to questions.
Okay, one question we got from a few people was just to clarify what the acronym PINS stands for.
I can shout.
You go ahead.
The acronym stands for Persons in Need of Supervision. And this is a legal definition. In a lot of places, and Eric, you probably know this better than I do, it is truancy and running away that causes young people to be charged as a person in need of supervision. In some places it's called a CHINS, child in need of supervision, or sometimes called SINS.
Yeah, we in the manual there's a full chapter on just those terms, ranging from, as she said, person in need of supervision, youth in need of supervision. Some states now are terming the entire family in need of supervision, recognizing that if a youth is out on the streets or subject to one of these laws, there's probably issues with the whole family, and it opens up that entire family to receiving resources. And we encourage that broader view of the youth in need of supervision, the family in need of supervision, and of taking a support and service-based approach to that identification rather than a punitive criminal approach to them.
Okay, great. One point of clarification, another question we've gotten just a couple times. For anyone interested in reading the full report, just go to our website, www.nlchp.org. On the right side of the screen, you'll just see a list of publications, and it's called Alone Without a Home. It'll be right at the top. For people who wanted clarifications about laws in specific states, you know, of course, we won't have time to go into that here, but Alone Without a Home reviews laws in all 50 states and 6 U.S. territories, so we encourage you to read the full text. So we'll try to get through as many questions as possible here. The first one, Barbara Horde asks, are there any proposed HUD initiatives to allow youth to be offered vouchers?
Oh, interesting. This is Debbie. That's a very good question, and I think before I answer it off the top, I think we need to look into it. I believe so, but I think that that youth are can and should be able to benefit from vouchers, but I'm not sure if something has changed or that is just something that it hasn't been utilized as much as a response to young people.
And the only sort of vouchers that I'm aware of that could be potentially accessed by some youth where appropriate might be they might be able to help their family obtain a family unification voucher.
But I think Section 8 vouchers are permissible but for young people. No? It's a very good question, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. But youth who are over 18 years of age, but not more than 21, who left foster care and lack adequate housing, may be used in a limited way for up to, I think, 18 months of housing assistance. So those family unification program vouchers, even though they're not officially unifying with their family, some of the older youth might have access to those, but I'm not aware of anything for youth under 18 or youth who haven't aged out of the foster care system in that way.
Yeah, youth under 18, I think, are handled or seen differently.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Do you have any thoughts on whether expanding the definition of homeless youth, such as with HR 32, would negatively impact our ability to target youth living on the streets and in shelters who might become chronically homeless?
I don't think it would. I think it only opens up the ability to provide services to more youth or their families. If they are able to reunify with their families. I think communities are still able to tailor programs as appropriate to the need in the communities. HR 32 kind of sets a new ceiling by allowing the populations who aren't already included in the HUD definition to be able to be served, but it doesn't change the floor of what's required. So if a community sees the need within the traditional populations that they serve, they can continue to serve them in the way that they know best.
Okay. Nikita Scott is, it looks like a liaison in Polk County, Florida, wants to know, can liaisons do a verification letter for youth whose parent will not apply for health insurance so that they can receive free services at a clinic?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but the liaisons are empowered and required to help youth obtain necessary medical care, whether they are, homeless with a family or an unaccompanied youth. So if I'm not off the top of my head familiar with what Florida's requirements are for applying for health care, it may be, the liaison should check out the report and see what the specific laws requiring consent are for access to health insurance are in Florida. And if they don't require parental consent, then you can just say that. Or if they do require it, maybe a verification letter or something else would be a way of helping that youth. We can certainly, if she has a specific question or needs help with something like that, she can certainly contact us or check out the report and see if it has the information she needs.
All right. Caitlin Golden asks, how do low-threshold housing models for young adults differ from those targeted for chronically homeless adults? Are there good best practices to keep in mind?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So I think that we, very much are supportive of low barrier housing models for young people that get them off the street and begin the work of their sorting out how to, project themselves into a more positive future. I think that the major difference that I feel like we are always mindful of is that because young people are at a stage in their lives where there's a lot of transition that is that you expect and is a good thing, that we kind of look at transitional living differently as very appropriate for young people. And I think that in the adult mindful programming that's going on, there's a lot about permanent housing and getting people into permanent housing, and I couldn't agree more. But when you're talking about young people, often, what you want is to help them to transition from this particular place to the next phase where they will be, learning some new and different things. And so there's a different concept that we need to keep in mind, I think. I hope that answers your question.
Great. Let's see here. Good pertinent question here. It was mentioned that there's a lot of inconsistencies between state laws that address unaccompanied homeless youth. There be a standardized approach, perhaps at the federal level, to dealing with the problem, or is a state-by-state approach preferred, and the individual laws just need to be reformed?
I think a lot of the laws are in areas that are traditionally dealt with at the state level. So in some cases there could be federalism concerns. In other cases it may be that the appropriate approach is at the federal level. For example, even though education is often a very state and local issue, the McKinney-Vento Act was passed at the federal level because there wasn't adequate attention being given to the rights of homeless students at the state and local level. And that's certainly an area. There's a reauthorized version of the McKinney-Vento Act that's pending in Congress that we also are supporting. That law certainly needs strengthening in many areas, although it provides a really excellent base as it is. But for the, and this is something that you can definitely contact me if you're interested in federal advocacy or state advocacy on any of these issues. Our policy director at the National Law Center, Jeremy Rosen, could probably help you think through some of those issues of whether it's best to approach these at a state level or if we need some concerted advocacy at the federal level.
I also do want to add, though, that I'm aware that that HUD and HHS are doing a lot more talking together at the federal level about how to make sure that the definitions and the terms that are being used are commensurate and make sense. And there's actually discussion about how to make a data system that would be, shared. So I think that there's, this is a great time to have some of that conversation at both levels.
So, and just to wrap back to the other part of that question, in our report we pull out a couple of the best practices from different states that can be used as models, and the ABA Commission on Homelessness and Poverty, I believe, also has a sort of a set of model policies that apply to homeless youth. And so that could be another source of model language for use either at the federal or local level in your advocacy.
Okay, great. Let's see. Are undocumented immigrant unaccompanied homeless youth more at risk? And what is the nature of the challenges they face as opposed to unaccompanied homeless youth who are American citizens?
Wow. I think that it's absolutely true that they are more at risk because certainly accessing mainstream services for young people that are undocumented is a more complicated situation. Not that there are enough mainstream services for any of the homeless youth, but I think that there are some really wonderful programs around the country, some of whom are members of ours, that I would refer anyone to talk more specifically about how they manage that, because I think there are some greater challenges.
And I think also in the area of education, for example, we have just seen a court decision on the Alabama law on undocumented immigrants, saying at least that schools can't enforce it, that schools have a duty to educate all students, including undocumented students and including undocumented, unaccompanied homeless students. So at least at the school level, those barriers shouldn't exist, although the general climate of fear that's created by those kinds of laws could definitely be a hindrance, and schools should be actively doing outreach to let people know that they don't have to check immigration status, and getting that word out to the communities. But for a number of other services, obviously, those will either be statutorily unavailable or trying to reach out to various officials may put a youth at risk. We didn't look specifically at the issues of undocumented youth in our reports, but that could definitely be an area for expansion in the future.
Okay, I want to be respectful of people's time here. I'll try to squeeze in one more that's sort of a two-parter. I encourage anyone who has, further questions to follow up with Eric, and I'm sorry we weren't able to get to everyone because there were a lot of really insightful queries. You mentioned street outreach before. Can you explain further what type of outreach works, what type of outreach doesn't, and then the other part, how might schools and districts help in coordination efforts?
Well, street outreach is generally a strategy that works best when you have people who are doing the street outreach who are very familiar with the community, so that they're trusted members of the community. Because the most important sort of thing that is happening for young people who become disconnected from family and community and school is the mistrust that is generated about people who are who they see or don't see being of help to them. And so we often utilize other young people. We have a lot of great peer counseling that goes on with our street outreach, and many of them around the country. And it presumes that you're familiar with the places and times, and it's very flexible to different communities as a result. And it's a great way to really assure that you're doing all that you can to provide an immediate response to young people who hit the street and are so vulnerable, and also often it has a way of working towards ongoing relationships with young people who are in unstable circumstances, so that at the point at which they really need the help, they know where to go. And the other question you have to repeat.
So how might schools and districts help in coordination efforts?
Well, I think that one of the things that really needs to happen a lot more, as I experience it and understand it, is to recognize that for in many schools, young people that are unaccompanied are not, in fact, being counted. They're not part of the number of young people that are considered as part of the homeless youth numbers and services. And a lot of that is because we see so many many children who become homeless, identified as homeless within schools, do so because their families help for that to happen. They know of or encouraged because of their living situation to make known to the school system their circumstances so that they can get support. Well, when young people are on their own, they often are in a position, and we see this as a strength often, where they don't identify themselves as homeless. They see themselves as temporarily having, no place to stay, and they often don't want to make themselves known to any official for fear of what could happen, and they don't often know that there are services that will be provided. So one thing would be for the schools to work more, the liaisons to work to ensure, we're going to have this count in January where all the continuums are going to do a count that includes young people. Having young people identified as part of the schools is really an important piece of things. And I think, Eric mentioned a number of ways that there could be better coordination for schools to recognize that it's not as easy for young people who have had disrupted school situations because of their not having a stable place to live, that there may need to be some accommodations there. And it's not special ed accommodations necessarily. It's a different kind of accommodation, which, I think probably there are places where that's happening, but there are a lot of places where it isn't. So, I think that the schools, just like all of the other public agencies, need to recognize, I think, the importance of having a system of service, and which means a flow of information in both directions. As a provider, that's sometimes difficult to affect. It's the most important thing to create community around young person and young people, but it's not always easy because there has to be a lot of motivation on the part of the public agencies to see the value of it.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I think Debbie's point about a two-way street of communication, talking with the homeless youth that the liaisons have already identified, whether they're in a family situation or unaccompanied, and finding out what would work best for them to reach out to them. Doing affirmative outreach within the schools, putting up posters, putting up, doing talks. Youth may not always be listening, but at least you can try and reach somebody in the audience, even if it's not the unaccompanied youth themselves. Maybe one of their friends will hear the message and then be able to recognize that their friend is homeless, under the federal definition, and should be able to access services and benefits if and be able to refer them. And also talking to the youth about where in the communities they might be gathering, where information could be posted, restaurants, laundromats, libraries, other places where youth may be hanging out, and just, putting out brochures, and putting out other, very low barrier sort of information saying if you aren't currently living with your parents, if you, or if you aren't currently living in a home situation, not necessarily saying the word homeless, but using other terminology to help students self-identify,
Right.
then you may be able to reach those students wherever they are, and finding out who those students are, and finding out from current students how to reach them would be a really good way of doing that.
And I think, welcoming back young people, I think that for so many young people who have had unstable living situations, their school experience is so disrupted. It is hard to approach, going back to school. So finding, welcoming people is very valuable.
And just to close the loop, also, making sure that any of the materials or the presentations remove those other barriers. Let students know that if they identify themselves, they won't be kicked out of school. They won't necessarily be reported to the police or any other agency unless that's absolutely required, or whatever the consequences might be. Removing the misinformation barriers so that youth can actually reach out without fear and get the services that they need.
I mean, I think Celia said something about that she didn't know what her rights were. I think for a lot of young people, they feel that way. They don't feel that they understand that they have rights, that they have, these supports are there to help them.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. Again, I'm sorry I couldn't get to every question. I think some of them will be answered in the report. And again, to read the report, go to www.nlchp.org. On the right side, there will be a list of publications, and Alone Without a Home will be the first. And we encourage you, after reading the report, to follow up if you have further questions. We also, in our publications on the website, have a guide to children's McKinney-Vento education rights, which is also a very good resource. So thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it, and we encourage you to read the report and try to put it into practice.
And again, the webinar will be available hopefully within the next week on our website. So if anybody missed portions of it or wants to share it with their friends, the full video presentation and audio portion should be available there within a week.
Yes.
May I also say thank you so much to the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty for joining with us and doing this wonderful report. I think that there is nothing more important than to have materials for advocacy, and this certainly provides us with that. So I really thank you so much, and please know that the National Network stands ready to be helpful in any way to advance this report and to help with the advocacy that can go on around it.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.